This podcast is brought to you by the Maryland State Library Agency. The MSLA podcast features presenters from statewide youth programs, as well as learning opportunities for library staff and resources for patrons of the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another LBPD guest hour. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Ashley Biggs, and I am the Marketing and Outreach Librarian for the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled. And as you know, every month we try to bring you a fresh podcast on a different topic with different members of our community, both here locally in Maryland and across the country. And May, for those who don't know, is American Cheese Month. And my lactose intolerant self absolutely loves cheese. It is the most wonderful thing in the entire world for me. However, cheese comes in all shapes and sizes. And today we are celebrating all things cheese. Despite Wisconsin being thought of as this cheese haven, Maryland actually has a rapidly growing cheesemaking community. And it's led in part by our guest, Dan Porter from FireFly Farms. Dan grew up on a small farm near Baltimore, Maryland. He's one of 9 children, so, much love in that family. And his family actually moved to Accident, Maryland in 2003 when he was about 14 years old. And while there, he started working on with local farmers and in residential construction until he started a cheesemaking apprenticeship. And he actually started with FireFly Farms in 2005. In college, he progressed to assistant cheesemaker, then to cheesemaker, head cheesemaker, and now he's the director of operations at FireFly Farms. He's currently in charge of day-to-day operations, as well as the many corporate and administrative tasks that come with running a business. And he and his wife, who is the coordinator of operations for Garrett College, are raising registered and commercial cattle and hay on his family-owned farm, totaling 210 acres. That's a lot of farm. It really is. But he puts all of this to good use, and he really goes out and shows off the cheese making in his community. And I want to highlight FireFly Farms because not only are they an nationally award-winning cheesemaking farm right here in Accident, Maryland? That's Garrett County. They have worked incredibly hard to be part of their local community, and they have made environmental sustainability a big part of their business. They have made community engagement a big part of their mission. And I want you to learn more about them at FireFlyFarms, all spelled out, .com. Dan, welcome.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for the nice introduction.
Did I get everything? Because, you've done a lot here.
Well, I'm old, I guess.
I'm
actually only 37, but we got a lot of cheese making crammed into the last 21 years.
And you know what? If you find your passion and you go with it, there's nothing wrong with it.
I say that all the time.
So I'm going to start with the most basic question I've got to ask. How do people make cheese? What's the process?
Yeah. So in advance, just to set the scene for anybody listening, I'm sitting outside of our cheese plant on the porch out back. It's almost 80 degrees and sunny outside. It feels beautiful. So it's a great time to talk about cheese making for a while and not be working. So if there's any weird background noise, it's because I'm outside. So imagine, back in the day, pre-refrigeration, pre-electric lighting, maybe you're in Switzerland or France in the mountains and you have all these cows or goats that make a great food source during the spring and summer called milk. And there's plenty of it in the spring and the summer. But as we all know, milk doesn't keep very long, especially when you live with no refrigeration. And so, over time, people developed a way to preserve the milk. And it works in similar ways as other types of fermenting preservation. You're basically just altering the state of the food to where it is no longer a place for pathogens to live that make people sick. So there's lots of different ways to do that. If you think about curing meat or making sauerkraut or kimchi, but cheese, basically milk is a lot of water, some sugar, fat, and protein. And bacteria loves water and sugar. um, and there's pathogenic bacteria that make you sick, and then there's helpful bacteria. So by removing a good bit of the moisture and by introducing something that eats a lot of the sugar, that is preserving it. So if you go to like the more simple types of cheese like yogurt, you just put a bacterial starter culture in that's basically an inoculant. So there's little bacterias that start eating the sugar in the milk, and they are replicating, usually algorithmically. So 2 bacteria, 4 bacteria, 8 bacteria, 16 bacteria, 32 bacteria. Very quickly, you have a lot of bacteria, and they're eating the sugar. And usually, as a byproduct of the sugar, they are producing lactic acid, which is the tangy thing that you can think of when you think of the flavor of yogurt, sour cream, cream cheese, buttermilk. What that tanginess that you're tasting is lactic acid. And so usually those bacteria actually produce so much lactic acid, say in a yogurt, that they've actually will kill themselves off, because it's so acidic. But it also makes an environment where, one, they've eaten a bunch of the sugar, so there's no more footprint for pathogenic bacteria to live in. And they've also created a very acidic environment that's no longer a happy place for pathogenic bacteria to live in. So if you just think about like plain yogurt or sour cream, that was milk that has just had a bacteria starter culture introduced to it that has taken up all the footprint that bacteria can live in, and also created an acidic environment that is a preservative kind of for the food, because now it's, think about things that are pickled, how long they last because they're so acidic. So that's what's happening in cheese. You're removing a lot of the water, which takes up a lot of space, and concentrating down that milk food source to where it is a more concentrated but also has been preserved. And most of those early types of cheese, the kind that we would still make here at FireFly, um, they don't need refrigeration. So, yogurt's good for a couple weeks with no refrigeration. If you were making it back in the day, a lot of the hard cheeses, they can be in like a cave environment, like 55, 60 degrees for 10 years, no problem, as long as you're taking care of them. So pre-refrigeration, you could condense down that summer bounty of food that only lasts for a few days because it's milk, and milk spoils with no refrigeration, and preserve it for the winter or, following years. And then the way a lot of the bacteria got introduced early on, before like now, we actually specifically buy strains of cheese making cultures and introduce them to the milk. But back then, it would have been things that were native to the environment. So a lot of types of cheese are named after where they came from, because that was the kind of cheese they made in that neighborhood. So, Camembert in France is named after a region, like Roquefort blue cheese is named after a region. And they didn't have like, oh, we make 10 kinds of cheese in this town. It was like, when we make our milk into cheese, this is what it's like, because this is the native bacteria that's in the animals, in the air, in our cave. And then those bacteria then got propagated and kept in those areas because they liked those flavors. And then now you buy those strains of bacteria. So like we can buy the same strain of cheese culture that they use in Roquefort to make Roquefort blue cheese, et cetera, Brie, Camembert, pick your favorite cheese. But it used to just be regional based on what was native to the animals and the environment, and that was what was in the cheese. And then they didn't understand sanitation, so they didn't know about boiling, they didn't know about sanitizing. So all of their wooden spoons, wooden buckets, wooden bowls, everything would have been impregnated with those bacteria. So when you go ahead and put your nice fresh milk in those, wooden vessels, wooden, butter churn, whatever, it's all full of that same bacteria from the last batch of cheese, and it inoculates the next batch. So bring that forward to now, in 2026, we're making cheese and everything is, stainless steel, refrigerated. The processes can still be the same if you want that old style cheese. So we can make blocks of vacuum sealed orange cheese that lasts forever and tastes the same. But we can also make with the same milk more of those old style cheeses that are handmade, more unique flavor, have mold on them, scooped by hand, wrapped by hand, turned every day in the aging room by hand. And there is a market for those types of specialty cheeses. And that market also um, commands a little bit of a premium. So maybe we can sell that cheese for twice as much because we've handled that differently in a way that a machine can't. So that's kind of the how did we get to cheese is, people were just trying to find a way to preserve that spring and summer bounty of milk. And we've slowly mechanized that process to make it more like antiseptic and kind of mechanized. And that's a good way to make a lot of food quickly. But then we can still use the old methods to make cheese that's more similar to like what they would have been making in Europe 100 years ago or 500 years ago even.
I'll tell you what, I've tried that Camembert cheese and it's not for me.
Yeah, it's funny what you get used to. I mean, when I first started making cheese when I was 17, stuff that like I would have turned my nose up to, like now my mouth waters when I think about it. Like
Yeah.
that like gooey, moldy something that like back in when I was a kid I would have thought was gross just from working around it for so long. Now when I think about it, like my mouth waters. So it's like what you get used to kind of.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I love trying different cheeses from everywhere, everything. I love it, but Camembert and I were not friends. I tried that on toast. I always try things 3 times. Because you never know. You could have a bad experience the first time. It could be prepared wrong, whatever. It wasn't for me. I don't know, but I'm a big fan of Gruyere. Like Gruyere is my thing. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah. So I know that Farms and other local cheesemakers really like to source their milk locally. And in fact, you go for like a 30-mile radius or something? Like it's very local. How does that impact the quality of the cheeses you make?
Yeah, one of the benefits that we have in our area is we're up here in the mountains where it's nice and cool and it's a good area for goats. So when we started the farm in 2002, Mike and Pablo started FireFly Farms and we had our own goats. And then we needed more milk. So we started buying from a few local Amish farmers. And slowly we got to where we were buying much more milk than we were producing. So then we just decided to stop milking our own goats and just keep buying milk and growing the local herd. So a lot of these guys that are milking now, these are families that were, this guy's son, this guy's nephew. When they got older, they started milking. And so now we have 14 farmers within like about a 30-minute drive of our facility that are milking goats, and their wives and their kids are milking, and like goats are easy to handle for like kids and stuff. So I mean, that's I grew up with goats too. And a lot of times the milk that would be like going to big cheese plants will be a few days on the farm in a refrigerated tank, and then it goes on a milk tanker and it goes a couple days across the country and then it gets processed. So our milk, a lot of times when the milk gets milked in the morning, it'll come into our plant within 2 hours and we start making that cheese that afternoon. So we can be making cheese that was milked out of the goats like 6 hours later, very fresh. So it definitely affects the quality and the flavor. Tends to make it like less goaty. When people think about goat cheese, it has like a reputation of tasting like what goats smell like. And that's why you hear goaty a lot. But there is some lipids and things in milk that when you start to break those like chains of fat up, it tends to give like off flavors and rancid flavors. So the quicker you can get that milk pasteurized and processed into cheese, usually the cleaner and fresher the taste is going to be, which is a lot of what we're going for with a lot of our cheeses that are fresh. We're going for like, you want to be able to taste like clean milk. And then we have some that we're specifically trying to get, strong, goaty flavor out of, and that's a different style of cheese. But we still process the milk quickly. It's just different cultures and how you handle it. But our biggest kind of strength that we have being where we are up here in the mountains, even though it's far from major metro areas and, it's hard to get the cheese to New York, it's hard to get it to Baltimore and DC, whatever, is that we're very close to where the goats are. So that's why we're here.
I think my kids have asked for goats like several times, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's not happening.
They're so good though. They're like easy. They're like a dog.
Yeah, I know and they're cute. Oh my gosh, are they cute?
Yeah.
But no, I don't think we have a big enough yard. you know, since you are so local with your products, um, you know, it sounds like that being local has contributed to the quality of the cheese that you're making.
Yep.
Uh,
It really does.
I'm That's so awesome. I mean, everyone talks about the whole, farm to table type thing, but you're really living that value, and that's pretty awesome. One of the things I noted in cheese making, high quality cheese making, is that simple ingredients are used. It's very, very simple. You're not adding, you know, liquid flavoring and things like that. It's very natural. How does that influence what you do?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are lots of flavored cheeses. So we don't make any currently. We have in the past, we've had some flavored cheeses and things, but what we're going for is we want you to be able to taste like the milk, the cultures, the salt, the age room, So cheese itself really only needs two ingredients. Usually it gets about four or five because it's going to get some salt and some cheese culture. But it is a very simple process. But if you think about like if you've had plain oatmeal, it has a taste. And then maybe you put some butter or some honey or something in there, and then it has a little more taste. And then by the time you put like dried apples, raisins, cinnamon, whatever you can think of, you can no longer taste the oatmeal, right? Now you just have whatever all the flavors were. So there are definitely cheeses that have lots of flavors in them, but I think our cheese it tastes like itself. It doesn't have a lot of, masking flavors in it.
I love that. I'm one of those. I love to taste the milk. I love to taste the natural flavors. Although don't get me wrong, that those infused ones like apple and stuff like that can sometimes be really good, especially on a charcuterie board next to a bonfire.
Yeah.
It's you know with you being way out in Garrett County, and being one so close to the goats as you mentioned, do you find that the goat itself, like the different goats, make help make the cheese different flavors?
Yeah. So if you had a herd of, say, just Nubians, or if you had a herd of just La Manchas, which is like a goat from Spain, I believe Nubians are from Africa. You've got like Alpines and Sonnens are from like Alpine countries like I think Switzerland, Germany, all those ones that are right along the Alps. They do have different properties and characteristics in their milk. And, some are higher volume, but there's less fat and protein. Some are higher in fat. And then there's like, if you get into the breeds like pygmy goats and like non dairy breeds, they would even have much different components. But the interesting thing about our goat herds is because there are so many herds and each producer is having what they like. So maybe this guy likes Nubians and this one likes Sonnens and Alpines and this one likes La Mancha goats, which are the goats that don't have any ears. It's a type of goat that has ears about the size of a squirrel, where like a Nubian has ears that are like a big hound dog would have like 6 or 8 inches long. And then you've got La Mancha goats, which have ears that are like the size of a squirrel, and they look totally different. They don't even look like the same animal. Um, because all the different herds are different types of goats, by the time the milk comes in on the same milk truck every couple days when they run around and pick up from all the farms, it's actually a blend of all the different breeds. So the different types of goats do have different characteristics of their milk, but because we have so many herds of goats and they're all different, by the time we get the milk, it's blended from all the farms. So we kind of have an interesting blend of milk that we use that is maybe helps our specific cheese characteristic, because if we only had one type of goats, then the cheese would maybe be a little different.
I noticed on your website that your your farm, your FireFly farm is very focused on, animal husbandry and being kind. Does that affect the flavor as well? Like being kind to the animals?
I don't actually know if that affects the flavor. That just, you know, helps you have a good life and sleep at night. Obviously, you deal with these animals all the time. Myself, me and my wife have a lot of animals, and we do it because we like to interact with the animals and have them, not because we want to, extort them and abuse them.
I love
So
that.
I'm not sure how much the kindness affects the flavor. That's a nice idea. Obviously, you would hope it would, but mostly all of us know that like our livelihoods are dependent on the health and safety of the animals. And there's also a lot of like milk component testing and stuff that is based on the herd health. So there's like a thing called somatic cell count, which is basically white blood cells in the milk. And so if your milk has a high somatic cell count, it usually means that there is a sick goat somewhere in the herd. And so it's very necessary that our farmers are keeping an eye on their goats and keeping them very healthy, because in our frequent milk testing, if we have any high somatic cell, that goes to the state regulates what your somatic cell counts can be. There's always some level of somatic cell, but we are always checking on the goat's health because it comes through in the milk. I mean, as you could imagine it would. um, if the goat is sick, the milk is sick. And so they're milking a lot of different goats, and so we test all the herds independently all the time for different health things, just to make sure that the goats are healthy so that the milk stays healthy. But
Love
it
that.
comes down to making sure they're getting the right food and water and shelter and everything to keep them healthy, because we are legally required to have healthy milk, and that means that the goats have to be healthy too.
Well, I mean, that's just basic courtesy to the animal that's helping you
Exactly.
too.
Yeah.
One of the things you touched on before, and I think I want to dive a little deeper, is you said that all the milk kind of gets homogenized, like it's all kind of mixed together. Um, but the pasteurization process, what does that mean? Because we were talking about safety of the animals, but what does the safety of the milk look like with pasteurization?
So there's different types of pasteurization. Pasteurization is something that they started doing almost they started pasteurizing milk early on in the 1900s, I believe. Might have been the end of the 1800s, but there was a lot of bovine tuberculosis. So if you can think back to like history that you've heard of, like, oh, all these babies are dying from tuberculosis, it was almost all bovine tuberculosis. So it was coming through the cow milk that they were feeding these kids. And that was what was making the kids sick. Because now herds are tested for tuberculosis. So you could be like, well, this cow herd has tuberculosis, get them fixed up, don't keep the milk, then we'll let them. Well, now they've pretty much eradicated bovine tuberculosis because there's a way to test for it and treat for it. But back then, they didn't even really know that that's how it was happening. So there was all these kids that they were feeding cow milk to, that it was basically making them sick, and they were dying because there was bovine tuberculosis in all the milk. And so that was one of the reasons they started pasteurizing milk. But there are also a lot of pathogens that can live in milk. So it's like the second most happy environment for pathogen growth after blood, because it just has the right amount of warm, sugar, water. Um, and so if you get a pathogen in milk, it can really spread. So pasteurization, I mean, you've heard of raw milk cheese before, but pasteurization is basically you're going to heat it. There's a few different levels of pasteurization. So there's vat pasteurization, which is what we do, which is the least amount of heat. There's HTST, which is high temperature short time, which is I think 165 degrees for 15 seconds. And then there's ultra pasteurized, which is basically like boiled. So if you see any milk that is on the shelf that's not refrigerated, say chocolate milk or goat milk, sometimes you'll see on the shelf and it doesn't need to be refrigerated. That's canned milk. So it's ultra pasteurized. And so it's basically heated to the point where everything is done in that milk. All of the biology is basically done. HTST and vat pasteurization, the way that we do it is 145 degrees, which is about as hot as you could dip your finger in without it hurting, for 30 minutes. And that is the temperature at which it will kill off pathogenic bacteria. So our goal is to reset that milk to where it can't make somebody sick. So raw milk is not inherently dangerous. It's just potentially dangerous. It's coming out of an animal on a farm, getting transported around, moving through pipelines and tanks and things. And if at the final point of use, you heat it up to a level at which it's been validated that it'll kill off any pathogens, which is 145 degrees for 30 minutes. Now that milk is, we can guarantee that it's safe versus you think it's safe. We know that it is because we heated it. And then that also resets a lot of the bacteria that's native to the milk so that we can add in cheese cultures, which are other bacterias. So we're adding in a lot of cheese cultures that would be maybe the native bacteria of this place in France or this place in Switzerland, this place in the British Isles. So you almost end up with a blank slate when you pasteurize. So you can make a lot of different kinds of cheese from the same milk. But the reason that we pasteurize in Maryland is specifically to neutralize any harmful pathogens that would make somebody sick.
Yeah, I don't want to be sick from my cheese. No. so so when you do this and you're doing this on the farm, there's a lot of automation. So I'm guessing pasteurization is automated and things like that. But, you talked earlier about small batch. Is the process a little different?
Yeah, so even our pasteurization isn't automated. There's going to be, me, my sister who works here, someone else is going to set up all the pipeline to go between our refrigerated milk storage tanks and our vat pasteurizers, and then put an inline filter in to make sure that if there was anything that came from the farm, we're going to catch it before it gets to the cheese vat. That would be like maybe an animal hair or a gnat or something. That's why we have filters. And when they pump that milk into the pasteurizer, you're just, you set everything up, you push the button, you watch the milk flow through the filter, and then we're going to pump 270 gallons of milk, which is, a few bathtubs full, into a big stainless steel pasteurizer. And we start heating that slowly. So it takes about an hour and a half. And, to heat that, someone opens some valves, turns on the boiler, and we heat it kind of like a double boiler. So we just pass hot water around the walls of the jacket. So it's a very gentle, slow heating process because protein does not do well with heat. So think about an egg yolk, an egg white or an egg yolk, especially the white. That's like clear and viscous, and then you hit it with some heat and it all of a sudden turns into like a solid white, rubbery mass. And that's because the protein has been denatured by the heat. So most things that are protein, if you hit them with heat, something changes. You think about like how the way that a steak will cup up when you grill it on one side, or so if we heat the milk too harshly, it'll actually damage the proteins in the milk. So that's like ultra pasteurized milk. The heat has damaged the protein so much that you couldn't make cheese out of it if you wanted to. And the reason that we want to be gentle with the protein is because the curd that the cheese is made from is just strands of protein that have coagulated together to be like a network. So if you damage the protein too much, you won't be able to get coagulation. It'll stay liquid. You'll never get cheese curd out of it. So we're going to heat that slowly from refrigerated temperature, like 36 degrees, up to 145 over the course of about an hour and a half in something that's like a big double boiler. And then we're going to hold it there for 30 minutes at a nice kind of safe temperature that doesn't hurt the milk. And then we're going to cool it back down to body temperature. And these are all manual processes that someone does. So someone opens some valve, opens a lid, opens the caps, turns on this pump, turns off this timer. So someone's there watching it all the time. You can actually get stuff to automate all this, but we don't have it. So we just have people. And then when it gets down to body temperature, that, say in the 90 degrees, that's when you start adding your cultures, because we want the milk at a temperature that supports bacteria growth. And that's at that, 90 to 95-degree level is about where the milk really can replicate all those cheese making bacteria that are going to make the flavor and the texture. So then we add rennet, which is the coagulant, which we'll probably talk about further down, but that just turns the whole vat of milk into like a big soft jello. And that takes about 30 minutes. So it'll go from liquid to, semi-solid in about 30 minutes. And then someone's going to cut that curd with big cheese knives that look like harps. And you just run it around in the big jello until it's all in cubes. And then get a long glove that's like up to your shoulder, and you just stir it by hand real gently, because the curds are very, very, very fragile in the beginning. And as you're stirring it, the stranded protein is continuing to bond together. All the curds want to stick together. And the curds are shrinking and releasing moisture. And then when you get the curds to the moisture level that you want, which we basically just know off of feel and time, then you can scoop those curds into whatever molds you're going to use. And then, those cheeses get flipped multiple times right after they're scooped so that they start to take the form of their mold. And then they go into a brine usually to get some salt. And then they go into an aging room for a few weeks to start to develop flavor. And while they're in the aging room, they get flipped every day or every other day and rotated in the stack. And, a stack of one type of cheese will have like 800 cheeses, and there will be like 10 stacks in there. So someone has to go in and flip 8,000 cheeses that day. It takes a couple hours. There's a lot of hand work in the way that we do things. The only process that we've really automated right now is we have some packaging processes that are easier than they used to be. So when I started, to package soft goat cheese, you would form it into logs in a process that we would do by hand. And then we would cut those logs with a measuring stick and a knife down to size. And then we'd wrap them in 2 layers of plastic, wrap them in a sheet of paper, put 3 stickers on them, and then that's ready to go to Whole Foods. But 20 years later, we have a machine that you can kind of dump that soft goat cheese in one side. It makes you nice 4-ounce logs that you then pick up and put into another machine that puts them in a vacuum seal pouch, kind of like what a string cheese comes in, but bigger. And then it comes out the other side. And then we still have a kid named Sam that he's worked here for a long time, and he's going to still put 2 stickers on that and put it in a box. But that's about as automated as we've got. Is we have a few packaging processes that you can almost feed the cheese in and it comes out packaged. But most of the processes we do are all by hand. We don't have a lot of automation yet, but I don't know. This type of cheese doesn't really lend itself to automation. Blocks of yellow cheese, which I like just fine. Usually they'll have that fully automated, where the milk comes in and the cheese comes out packaged. There's not a lot of human touch. But most of what we do, the cheese is getting touched all the time by a human. Some of our cheeses that we age for a year, they've been handled multiple times a week for a year. That's hundreds of times before it gets to the store.
How does the handcrafting of your cheeses, how does that affect consistency, labor, taste? I mean, how does that work?
So it definitely adds a lot of labor expense. And that's partly why our cheeses are more expensive than just, your generic grocery store block cheese, is because it has to be, because we have so much labor. The type of cheese that we make, we kind of focus on the kind that can't be mechanized, because that's what the market, that's what's missing in the market. It's these older style cheeses that are smaller, more unique, European style. Maybe they've got some mold on them. Maybe they're stinky, runny, something that a machine won't deal with well. And I don't think that the handwork necessarily changes anything in like the flavor, texture, consistency, whatever. But the fact that those types of cheeses are rare because they have to be made that way is why we make the kind of cheeses that we do, is because there's a market for it because it's hard to do.
So if someone's making cheese, if you're making cheese there, do you need to have rennet? Like first off, what is rennet? And do you need to have it? And is it like an animal byproduct? Like what do you do? What is it?
So you don't have to have rennet to make cheese because there are types of cheese, quote unquote, that are not solid. They would be like your yogurts, your kefir. Those are technically cheeses, but there's no, you think about them, they're pretty liquid. And that's because they haven't had rennet. All of the coagulation that's happened in that cheese has happened because of acidity. And acidity will curdle milk. So it won't coagulate it, but it'll curdle it. So there are cheeses that you can make at home where you take some hot milk and you put vinegar or lemon juice in, and it will separate the protein and the fat from the water. But the way that it does it is not coagulation, it's curdling. And curdling will make curds, but it doesn't make the same kind of curds as coagulation. And so we have one type of cheese that we make, you know, a couple 1,000 pounds a week of. That is our fresh goat cheese. It's chèvre. It's the classical French goat cheese that's soft, spreadable. And we call it fresh goat cheese, but it's technically is a chèvre. That cheese has no rennet to speak of. It's primarily acid from the bacteria that kind of changes the milk so that it becomes soft goat cheese. And so the bacteria that we put in creates so much lactic acid that it actually curdles the milk. We do actually add a little bit of rennet, but it wouldn't be that much different. But all the other cheeses that we make need rennet. And what rennet does is it is an enzyme that coagulates the milk from a liquid to a semi-solid kind of jello mass. And where that comes from in nature is the baby stomach of the stomach of baby mammals that consume milk. And the reason that baby animals have that, and maybe if you've ever fed a baby calf a bottle or a baby goat or even a baby person, very quickly after you give them their bottle, they will need to urinate because they've somehow taken a lot of the moisture out of that milk and kept the solids. And so think about if you've ever had a baby puke on you, it comes out, it's pretty much cheese when it hits your shoulder. That is because they have the enzyme in their stomach that takes milk and coagulates it into a semi-solid. And the reason is if you or I, especially you if you're lactose intolerant, drink, say, a quart of milk, you're going to feel bloated. And it's going to take you a while to digest that to where you have any more room in your stomach. It's very hard for adults to drink a volume of milk like a baby would. And the reason is because we don't have that enzyme in our stomach anymore. It goes away after you're weaned. And so a baby mammal, goat, cow, person, dog, whatever, they have that enzyme in their stomach where when they drink a bunch of milk, immediately it turns into a ball of cheese in their stomach. And you think about when you're burping your baby or a little calf's running around, that curd is being manipulated in their stomach and getting to be a smaller and smaller ball and releasing moisture, just like it does what we do in the cheese vat, to where 30 minutes after they drink that milk, where we're still going to be bloated and full, they're going to have a little ball of soft cheese that they made themselves, and their, intestine or whatever will have pulled out the moisture. And that's why babies often urinate 30 minutes or right after they drink a bottle, is because their body has already pulled the moisture that they don't need, used what they need for their cells, and then put the rest right in their bladder. And now, for the next 4 hours till they eat again, they're going to be digesting this ball of cheese in their stomach that they made. So it's a way for mammals to transfer a lot of nutrition into their babies. Because if they got bloated like us, how are they going to be able to use that nutrition? Their stomachs are very, very small. Or if, it's not like you can take like a baby and feed them chunks of cheese, like they can only swallow milk. So it's like the perfect system to take nutrient from the mom's body in a liquid form, get it into the baby, and then they inside their own stomach process it into a ball of cheese, get the water that they need, and release the rest. So that's what rennet does in nature. Is it's an enzyme that's in the stomach of babies. And it used to be that when you needed rennet, you would just have to kill a baby animal, take their stomach, and soak it in water, and then you would use the water from soaking the dead baby's stomach to make cheese. And that's what is still used when they make calf rennet. So you can buy it. It's called calf rennet. And it's usually veal calves or some calf that they needed to kill anyway to make veal out of. And they take their stomach, they soak it, they clean it up, and then they sell you the liquid and you use it in cheese making. But they also have what's called vegetable rennet, and that's what we use. There's different types of vegetable rennet. Somebody figured out at some point that there's a type of thistle that has that same coagulating enzyme in it. So there's thistle rennet. And I don't know who figured it out, but it's cool because nobody likes thistles anyway because they're all spiny and they're thorns basically. So you can grow and harvest thistle and get the enzyme out of them. And there's another type, which is the type that we use, that's called microbial coagulant, and it is a enzyme that's grown through a microbial process, basically in a lab, producing the same enzyme on a substrate, and then they just process the substrate and then usually dilute it down to the concentration that is the standard in the industry. And so basically our enzyme that we use is microbial coagulant, which is a vegetarian derived rennet. And it makes it where you don't have to like kill baby animals every time you want to make cheese. But that is where the enzyme comes from in nature, is baby animals. But we figured out ways to make it without animal products. So therefore it can be, vegetarian derived, or you can just take it from that type of thistle. But that's what rennet does, is it coagulates milk, and it has a good process in nature. They say that the original cheese that was made was from people storing milk in bags that were calf stomachs or goat stomachs. So, back in the day, you didn't have plastic bags. What are you going to put your stuff in? So they would just make bags out of skin, and they would even keep liquid in the skin bags. And if you just happened to put some milk in a bag that was made of a calf stomach, and then when you went to dump it out, it was no longer liquid, it would have been semi-solid or solid. And they liked it. So they're like, let's keep doing that. But at some point, we figured out how to do it without using baby stomach. So that's good.
That's a little bit of a bright side there. I mean, for it, that means there's vegan cheeses out there, and or vegetarian cheeses at least.
Right.
I vegan and vegetarian, I know, are different.
Yeah.
Stupid question, absolutely stupid question. As you were talking, and we've been talking about the process. Mary Had a Little Lamb has been playing in my head, and eating her curds and whey, because you've talked about curds. Does cheese make whey?
Yeah, so as a cheese expert, that's Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet, not that Mary Had a Little Lamb. But it's a different
Sorry,
styled
nursery
rhyme,
rhymes are
children's
all
nursery rhyme.
mixed up.
So yeah, I mean, I use that analogy sometimes, like people don't understand, but 20% of the milk ends up as cheese, and the other 80% ends up as whey. And you'll come across whey a lot in food products because it is something that has some nutritional value. It has a flavor, and it's also something you have to get rid of when you're making cheese. So if you have 20%, say we just made that vat that we were pumping earlier of cheese that's 270 gallons, 20% of that, about 60 gallons of it's going to be cheese. And then the other 210 gallons is going to end up as whey per batch. And we make usually like 4 batches a day. So we make about 800 gallons a day of whey. And it's about 95% water. So it's only about 5% solids left in that whey. And the solids are a little bit of fat, a little bit of protein, a good bit of sugar, and some minerals. And it's too nutrient dense to do nothing with, so you don't want to just dump it down the drain. But it doesn't have a lot of value left in it because we took most of the value out of that milk and turned it into cheese. So there's a few things you can do. You can have a evaporator, so you could turn it into whey protein powder. So you'll see a lot of times whey protein powder in drinks, or you can just buy it, whey protein isolate. And it is a different strain of protein because it's one of the ones that gets missed by cheese making. Because, cheese making, we're taking out the protein. So we're trying not to leave too much in the way. But there are types of protein that don't really coagulate well. But the thing is dehydrating the whey is very, it's an inefficient process as far as the energy it takes to evaporate that much liquid to get 5% solids out of it. So it would take a lot of propane, natural gas, electricity if you want to evaporate all your whey down to protein powder. And then you also have to capture it in a way that it's still food grade. So you have to make sure your draining system, a lot of times you have to reheat it. There are types of cheese that are made from whey. So we had talked about curdling the milk versus coagulating. So the protein that you miss with coagulation will actually curdle. So you can take all your whey, reheat treat it, and keep it hot and hit it with an acid, and it will coagulate, or it'll curdle out the remaining protein. And that is one way that they make ricotta. So when you see whole milk ricotta, that's just ricotta that's made from milk. But there are types of ricotta that are made from whey, where you just take your whey. And that was the classical way that ricotta used to be made, was you would make it with your leftover whey. But it's not as common anymore. Just like it's, buttermilk, they usually just take milk and culture it. They don't use what's left over from making butter, which is what buttermilk used to come from. But what we do, because we don't make a ricotta, it's too much work to get 5% volume again. It's just not efficient. We don't want to use all the energy it takes to evaporate it down to a powder and then sell it as protein powder. And there are other types of technology that are coming out where you can ferment it in like a biodigester and turn it into ethanol, or like turn it into a gas. There are people that make vodka out of it because there's like a little bit of sugar in it, and anything with sugar you can ferment into fuel or alcohol usually. But we currently store it in a refrigerated tank, and we give it away to local farmers to feed to their pigs. So it tastes kind of like buttermilk or like yogurt, if you know what plain yogurt or buttermilk tastes like, or sour cream. And pigs really like it. And it doesn't have a ton of food value. It's only 5% solids, but it's like every time that you or I are thirsty, we're drinking a chocolate milk instead of water. So we're going to be putting on weight, which is the whole, pigs, if they're being raised to butcher, they're just basically growing them so that they can be big enough to butcher. And so feeding them, instead of giving them their water, which they're happy to drink, every time instead you just give them whey to drink, which they like even more than water, they actually go crazy for it. Then they're getting calories from their water and their food, and it helps them grow. And it's healthy for them because it's full of like bacteria and microbiology and sugar and lots of minerals and calcium. And so they love it. It's good for them, and it's a way for us to get rid of it without, making either some pollution somewhere in a septic system that has to be treated before it can go in the wastewater, or, using a bunch of energy to convert it over to a powder or whey protein powder. So that's our goal, is to give it all away for animal feed.
Mm-hmm.
But also anytime we have extra that we can't do that with, we can land spread it. So it has a fertilizer value for like hay fields and things, because it does have nitrogen in it, which is like the primary thing that plants need to grow as far as fertilizer. So any that we have that we can't feed to the local pigs and stuff, we can actually land spread it on hay fields as fertilizer, and it makes the grass grow faster, which we then cut into hay and then feed back to the goats.
Very sustainable practice you've got there, bud. I like that. Dan, it really sounds like you and FireFly and everyone there has a passion for what you do. It really does sound like that.
Thanks.
And it's great to hear because, people I'm a foodie. I love food. So knowing that the person making that food has a passion for making it is wonderful. As we close out, I'd like to invite you to share anything about the farm or how people can learn more. Maybe I know you have an online store. How can they learn more?
Yeah, so if anybody wants to order cheese online, you can go to our website, which is fireflyfarms.com. You can also email me if you have any cheese making questions. My email is dan@fireflyfarms.com. And then if you're ever in Accident, Maryland, in Western Maryland, we have our cheese shop, which right now is open 7 days a week, and you can come in and try any cheese that we make for free, and lots of other cheeses from around the country and around the world that we stock in our cheese case.
So I want to thank you for being here, and I truly appreciate your taking the time and walking us through cheese because cheese is so important, not just to as a staple in our diet, but it's also important to our culture. And having this locally right here in Maryland is so awesome because everyone gets the big cheese hat when you're in Wisconsin.
Yep.
Maybe we need a crab made of cheese. Is that what we do? Like we make a crab and we just make it out. I don't know. I'm not good at jokes. I don't do jokes.
There's a few Maryland cheeses that have Old Bay in them. So we don't make one, but I've had at least 3 different Maryland cheeses that have Old Bay in them or on them. So
Hey, to each their own, right?
yeah, they're good. They're good. It's
Are,
a good combo.
I'll have to try that. So my favorite, honestly, is the wine infused cheeses. I love the flavor, and I tend to pair it with some homemade bread. So or scone. For some reason, sweet and savory. I
Yeah.
know. Um, so I'm just going to remind everyone that fireflyfarms.com is where you want to go. Their contact information is on their website, and Dan, of course, is available if you have questions. I did peruse their store, and they've got some really good options, both cow and goat, and they even have jellies and biscuits of kinds. So that's great. Dan, thank you so much for being with us today, and I hope you're celebrating in May National American Cheese Month because this is a form of American cheese. Woohoo!
Sure, for sure. Thanks for having us.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being here with us. And we will pick back up next month in June. And don't forget to check out the library's website for programming, events, account information, and more. Talk to you soon.
This has been a presentation of the Maryland State Library Agency. For links to additional resources provided by today's presenter, please visit the show notes. For more information on MSLA or the Maryland State Library for the Blind and Print Disabled, visit marylandlibraries.org.